It's 2.
It's 2. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for an overview of food service record keeping requirements. You've been invited to this session because you're fairly new to your position as a food service director or maybe a food service manager for your school meals program. And the group today is fairly small, so we hope you feel comfortable in asking questions. We'll do some introductions a little bit later, but I would like to share with you our presenters for today's session. So presenting today is Michelle Stevens, Marianne Brennan, Donna Hanley, and myself, Allie Lampman. We have a few housekeeping items and a few pointers if you're new to Zoom meetings. At the bottom of your screen is a chat box. You may use the chat box to type a question as you think of them during the presentation, but remember that we also will allow time at the end of the session for you to unmute yourself and ask any questions you have. The video camera symbol may be turned on so that we can all see each other. And finally, your microphone should be muted to limit background noise so everyone can hear the speaker. To tell if your microphone is muted, there is a line through the microphone icon, as we have shown here. So school year 2021, as we all know, has not been a typical year. Almost all schools in Nebraska are following summer food service program guidelines and serving up free healthy meals to their students. So learning the school meals program requirements adds the challenge for you to learn both the regulations for the summer food service program and the school lunch and breakfast program. Our nutrition services team typically provides a summer workshop for food service staff, but with social distancing requirements and travel restrictions in place, we were unable to offer the in-person training for this school year or provide any on-site one-on-one training for new food service staff. So instead, we've developed online training sessions and added Zoom sessions like serving up great school meals, which I hope you're all attending serving up great school meal sessions, and we encourage you to attend to keep up on the latest information during the school year. We're currently meeting once a month, and our next meeting is actually Wednesday, January 20th, next Wednesday. So if you need to be added to our list for serving up great school meals, please put your name and email in the chat for me, and I will get that done. So nutrition services school meals online training. We hope that all of you had a chance to view the school meals online training. These videos are there for you to view at your own pace. We developed online training specific for food service and for bookkeeping. We know most of the time in schools there is a team of people working within the program. So we encourage you to view all the trainings so that you're familiar with all the requirements for your school lunch teams. And hopefully you all did that already. So before we get to the agenda for today and talk any further, I'm gonna just pause here a moment, and I wanna introduce our nutrition services team. We're gonna go through introductions to presenters, and then also if any of the other team members are on, I would like them to introduce themselves since you guys are new and you're probably not familiar with our faces. So let me stop sharing here. And who would like to go first?
I'm Michelle, and I can go first. I'm Michelle Stevens. I'll be doing some presenting this afternoon. And next, I'd like to introduce Marianne.
Hi, I'm Marianne Brennan, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I will be visiting with you a little bit later about product labels. And next is Donna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Handley, and I will be presenting about professional standards and also standardized recipes today. And we are going to have a ball, I think.
I can go next. I'm Allie Lampman. I'm new to nutrition services. I just started in July, so I'm learning just as much as you guys are, all being new to all this and being a difficult year. Let's see, who is next? Rebecca, you're next on my screen. You want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Havikin. I'm the OA for the NSLP programs and summer food programs and who knows what else, whatever else falls on my desk. I'm new. I started in December, so I'm about, I don't know. I have a lot to learn. That's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm Laura Lutz with, actually I work in the western part of the state, and I just wanted to be on long enough to say hello to everybody, but I have to run because I have to pick up grandkids at school today. So just wanted to say hi.
I will go next. I'm Sean Vondrachek. I work in the school meals program and also the summer program. And when Rebecca introduced herself, she said, I'm the new OA. And she said that earlier at a meeting, and I had to think to myself, what does OA stand for? And we are so happy that Rebecca has joined our team as our office assistant, because many of you will have the pleasure of talking with Rebecca when you call in. So so glad to have Rebecca on our team.
Go ahead, Erica.
I'll go next. I'm Erica Arter, and I work out of the Lincoln office. I'm not presenting today, but feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you may have being new.
I'm Beth Haas, and I'm out of the Lincoln office also. I'm not presenting today, but I'll be backing Miss Donna up if she needs help.
Great. I think that was everyone from our team, wasn't it? Perfect. We're also going to provide you with a contact list at the end. So now you kind of know our faces, and you're welcome to reach out to any of us at any time for any assistance. Okay, I'm going to get back to the presentation. So for our agenda today, today's session is designed to make sure you know what resources and training are available to you. We will go over these specific topics today in more detail. You should have a copy of handouts that I included in an email reminder to this meeting. We will be referring to those handouts as we cover our topics for today. Those topics will be professional standards, training opportunities, the meal pattern for National School Lunch Program, and the meal pattern for Summer Food Service Program, production records, labels, recipes, procurement, and then at the end we'll have question and answers. The first page on the handout is a document of resources for the food service manager. When you have the PDF open on your computer, you can click on the hyperlinks to go to the website that has more information about the specific topic you clicked on. We will not be covering all these topics today, so we wanted to provide you a resource document to help you navigate where things are located on the internet. So some of these links are on the Nutrition Services website, and others are on the USDA sites. We encourage you to become familiar with navigating our webpage to learn more about specific topics. So we are going to move to professional standards, and I'm going to turn this over to Donna.
And Donna better unmute herself because she has a habit of not doing that. So thank you very much, Allie. Hello again, everyone. We know that training is an important part of learning the requirements of your job and keeping up with current information and changes. So we're beginning today's session with this topic to emphasize the importance of training in the school meals programs, and also because we will provide you with many training opportunities today In addition to the fact you can count this webinar toward your professional standard training hours, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end of the presentation. Professional standards for school nutrition professionals is a key provision of the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 that requires a minimum amount of annual training hours for all school nutrition program directors, managers, and staff. This slide shows the top of the professional standards handout in the packet. And Allie, would you mind switching over to the packet, please? Thank you. Okay, so you can see at the top of this handout, the number of required training hours varies by position. And I also want to mention at this time that training hours are oftentimes referred to as CEUs, which stands for Continuing Education Units. It's important to point out that regardless of your title at the school, you may be listed as a food service manager or the head cook, etc. If you're the person responsible for the management of the day-to-day operations of the school food service, you are considered to be the program director when it comes to the professional standards annual training requirements. So let's look a little bit at these requirements in this table on the handout. For example, program directors are required to get a minimum of 12 hours of training per year, managers a minimum of 10 hours, program staff that work 20 or more hours per week, 6 hours, and program staff who work less than 20 hours per week should get at least 4 hours of training. And I know today we have several staff from vended sites. And what we mean by vended sites are sites that do not prepare the food on site, but purchase that food from another site, typically another school, and then the food is delivered to them. So that's a little bit different. We have special numbers of hours of training for you. Vended site staff who work 20 or more hours per week should have at least 6 hours, and those who work less than 20 hours per week should have at least 4 hours of training. Required training topics will vary according to your position and your job requirements. So it's important for you and your staff to participate in training that is directly connected to your job duties. And there's training in every area and in every, that pertains to every job requirement. So that's not a problem. Okay, so let's go through this handout a little bit because there's a lot of important information in here, and we need to get started by covering some key points and talk about some great training resources. Under important points under the table, it shows that training hours can be earned in excess or extra hours earned in 1 year. And I do want to mention before I forget at this time that the school year runs from June 1st to July 1st to June 31st. So the 2021 school year began the 1st of July, 2020, last summer, and it will end June 30th. Did I say 31st anyway? I'm kind of confused today, evidently. So anyway, it will end at the end of June 30th, 2021. So these extra hours, if you earn more than 12 hours this year, and that is your requirement, you can roll those over into next year and use them. You can only roll them over into the year that comes after the year you earned them or the year preceding. And we think this might be helpful this year because many people had their training opportunities cut short when schools did not, were going to remote learning and doing other things during the beginning of the pandemic. So that's good to know that you can roll extra hours over into the preceding year or the following year. I also want to mention that the following food safety training is mandatory for vended site staff. There is some food safety training, a course on the Institute of Child Nutrition website. This is a great website. We'll talk about it again later. And that is mandatory to get that food service training. And then every year after that, everyone, not just vended site staff, but everyone should read and sign off on the standard operating procedures, otherwise known as SOPs, that are relevant to your facility. You should have a copy of them at your school, but they're also available on the website following the link that we have here on the handout. You also have to document your training. And we do have a really simple annual training log on our website you can use, which it works really well for schools who do not have a large number of employees or food in the food service area. And then the USDA also has a training tracker tool that you can use. So we give you the links to both. Okay, so scrolling down a little bit more, you see that we have several training links from our website. I believe Ali mentioned serving up great school meals. We have that series there, the link to it. We have COVID-19 training resources. The Launch Nebraska website has a lot of information for schools, including food service information. And on the top of the next page of the handout, there is just basically our training webpage that has a lot of information there. And then if you scroll down, continue to scroll down under other training resources, that's where the Institute of Child Nutrition portal is located. And you can click on this link and it will take you to what's called an e-learning portal. You do have to sign up with a password and a username, but you don't have to pay anything for it. It's all free, and there are hours of training on this site. Michelle's going to talk to us in more detail a little bit later about the School Nutrition Association, but it's also listed here because it has a lot of good training on that website also. And then several USDA training resources. And the last one on this handout is called Make an Account. And I'm not picking on you guys, honestly, but those of you who are vended staff, this is a really good site for you to go to get training also. I think it's nice to know what fits for you, what's good training for vended foods site staff. But it's actually a good site for everyone to go to because it's kind of fun, it's interactive, and it's kind of like you're playing a game. So it's a good way to learn. And next we go into civil rights. I think we'll just skip going to the slide, Ali, and just continue going through the handouts if that's okay. And the civil rights training is mandatory every year. You have to go through it every year. This is a 2-page handout you can use for training. On the first page, you notice that the non-discrimination statement is listed here. This statement is required to be included on certain school documents, so it will become very familiar to you. There's also, in addition to using this handout for training, there's also a really good civil rights training video from ICN that's located on our training webpage. And if we go now, we have to go, I believe, back to the slides because we want to look at the And Justice for All poster. And this poster may seem to look familiar to you. This poster, the And Justice for All poster, must be posted in each feeding site in a location that is visible to all students. So this is the current poster. Now, some of you may think it looks familiar because you might say, well, I have a green poster in my dining area, but it may have the Statue of Liberty on it. If it does, it's not the current poster. This one is. So what we want you to do is, if you don't have this updated poster, please enter in the chat box your name, email, and the number of posters you need. You may have more than one feeding site, may have more than one dining area, and you may need more than one, but we can get those mailed out to you. Again, in the chat box, your name, email, and the number of posters you need. Okay, so next slide. This shows a picture of the Nutrition Services Special Diet webpage. And special diets is actually also a part of civil rights, in that schools must work with students who require diet accommodations and provide the appropriate documentation. So at the top of the slide, I have circled there meal accommodation forms. Those are the forms that they need to fill out for so that you do have the documentation you need, or they can also fill out something that has all the required information, but these are really good forms to give to them to fill out. In the middle, there's a link to a webinar that explains what special diets are and how they should be accommodated. And then at the bottom of this slide, I've sort of semicircled the last link that takes you to the latest edition of the Special Diets Manual that's called Accommodating Children with Disabilities in the School Meals Programs. This is a really excellent manual. It's easy to read. It's a great reference for special diets and accommodations for those diets. So I believe I'm done talking about professional standards, and now Michelle is up next to talk to you about meal pattern.
Okay, so meal pattern. The first thing we want to talk about is which meal pattern are you following? So if you're claiming meals under the Summer Food Service Program, you have the option to either follow the Summer Food Service meal pattern or the National School Lunch meal pattern. So, but if your school remained in the school lunch meal pattern, then you will follow the meal pattern for school lunch. So you don't have an option if you're claiming your meals under NSLP. So how do we know which meal pattern you're following? This is a question on the CNP application. The site application was completed at the beginning of the school year and maybe by someone else at the school secretary. So if you're not sure, you can look there or ask that person at your school how that question was answered. I have a little clip there of it. Was question number 54 on the site application. And there's also a question for breakfast. And of course, you will follow the same meal pattern for breakfast and for lunch. And if you find out that the site application is not what you're doing, the application can be updated at any time by whoever's responsible for doing that at your school. So next slide is, well, what is the difference between the summer and the school lunch meal pattern? Well, both meal patterns require that you offer the 5 food components, and we'll go over those in a little bit. So, but whichever meal pattern you're following, you need to make sure that the minimum portion sizes are offered to students. So the summer meal pattern is a little simpler menu. There are only daily requirements and no weekly requirements, like there are in school lunch. The summer meal pattern only has 1 portion size for all the grade groups. You also don't have vegetable subgroups to follow and whole grain rich requirements like we do in school lunch. Of course, you can plan to serve those healthier options if you're following the summer meal pattern. This allows you more flexibility during this time. You know, you may be serving meals outside of the cafeteria. For example, you might be serving meals to remote learners or to students in the classroom. So this could create challenges if you are following the school lunch meal pattern in making sure that the correct portion sizes are served to the correct grade groups and the vegetable subgroups are offered over the course of the week. So there is a link to the full meal pattern charts for both the Summer Food Service Program and the National School Lunch in your resource handout that Allie had talked about at first. So it's not actually in your handouts that we attach to the PDF file, but in the resources, you'll click on those web pages and then you could print those handouts if you don't have those. But I would like to do an overview of each of the meal patterns. So starting on the next slide, let's take a look at breakfast for the summer meal pattern first. So you must offer for breakfast a carton of milk, a half a cup of fruit, or a vegetable, and a serving of grain. You'll notice that meat alternate for breakfast is optional. And then if we look at lunch, of course, we're going to have our carton of milk, and then 3/4 of a cup of fruit or vegetable. So with the fruit and vegetable, you must offer 2 different items. So you can either offer 2 fruits or 2 vegetables, or a combination of both that meet that minimum 3/4 of a cup requirement. We can always offer more, but we got to meet that minimum requirement. And if you offer either a fruit or a vegetable juice, you always need to make sure that it's 100% full strength juice. The minimum serving size for grains is 1 serving and a minimum of 2 ounces of meat alternate. Now the meat alternate requirement for summer is different in that for all grades need to be offered that 2 ounces of meat. So you need to make sure when you're looking at your entrees for the day that you do meet this requirement. I always kind of use the example of that smaller peanut butter and jelly sandwich that only credits as 1 meat alternate and 2 grains. And so if you were to offer that, you would want to supplement that with another meat alternate. And as I mentioned earlier, you can print the full summer food service chart from the link from your handouts. So now on the next slide, let's review the National School Breakfast Meal Pattern. So if you're following NSLP, here's an example of a menu that meets grade requirements for grades K through 12 is what I used for the example here. Because most of the time kids arrive at the school randomly, so all the kids eat together. So you're going to plan a menu that fits all 3 grade groups. And it's very easy to plan a K through 12 menu for breakfast. So first you're going to offer, of course, your carton of milk. And then the daily requirement is 1 cup of fruit or vegetable and 2 grain servings. That's the minimum amount that you have to serve at breakfast. Now you may offer a meat alternate along with that grain and count it towards the weekly grain requirements. So basically the second meat alternate may count as a second grain serving. And again, if we offer juice, it must be 100% full strength juice. And the other thing about juice is that no more than half of the fruit or vegetable offerings during the week may be in the form of juice. So an easy way to manage this is, for example, you offer a 1/2 cup of juice along with a 1/2 cup of fruit pieces such as peaches, and then you're meeting that 50-50 requirement right there. And that's very common in schools where they offer a juice and also either a canned fruit or a fresh fruit at breakfast. On the next slide, we'll talk about the lunch meal pattern. So the NSLP meal pattern for lunch has 3 grade groups. So if you look at the charts that we have out on the internet, you're going to see the 3 different grade groups with the minimum serving sizes for each of those grade groups. But as the menu planner, you can combine grade groups as long as you are still meeting your minimum serving sizes for those grade groups. So it's very common to plan a K through 8 and a 9 through 12 menu. So that's the example that I have here. So let's take a look at that. So for K through 8, we're going to serve the carton of milk for both grade groups, K through 8, 9 through 12. And then for fruit, notice that there are different minimum serving sizes for K through 8 and 9 through 12. The daily fruit portion for K through 8 is a 1/2 cup, but for 9 through 12, for your high school students, the minimum portion size that you have to offer is 1 cup. So typically, students are offered choices. If you have different types of fruit choices available in 1/2 cup portions, and the students are allowed to select more than one of them, then you're offering them the cup of fruit. The same thing for vegetables, but the minimum daily portion size for K through 8, notice, is 3/4 of a cup. So if you serve the vegetable on the line only, make sure the students are being offered 3/4 of a cup. But typically, you'll serve, like, for example, a hot vegetable on the line, and then the students can select another vegetable, maybe from a self-serve bar. So then you're in compliance with that 3/4 of a cup requirement. Vegetables also have minimum serving sizes for the different vegetable subgroups, which I'm not going to go over each of those serving sizes, but our vegetable subgroups in school lunch are dark green, red, orange, legumes, and starchy, and they're all outlined on the meal pattern chart for lunch. And to bring offer versus serve into this, as the menu planner, you must offer the students these minimum portion sizes. So that's a lot of fruit and vegetables for a high school student. But with offer versus serve, students can make their own selections. And we're not going to talk about offer versus serve today in our presentation. You can certainly ask questions later, but there is a link to offer versus serve manual that USDA created. And in there, it's a great resource for you. And the link is on your resource handout. And it talks about offer versus serve for the summer program and for the school lunch program. So next we'll talk about grains. You'll notice that there are daily and weekly requirements for the grain. The minimum serving size for K through 8 is you only have to serve them one a day, but notice that you have weekly requirements. And then for 9 through 12, we are required to serve those students 2 ounce per day with the weekly requirement. So to simplify menu planning, most managers just plan to serve 2 grain servings to all the students. But the flexibility with the K through 8 gives the menu planner some flexibility in adjusting the menu, and then just have to make sure you're meeting your weekly requirement. And then with meat alternate, the requirement also there has the daily and the weekly requirements. Again, a simple way to plan menus for grades K through 12 is to offer an item that credits as 2 ounces of meat alternate. But the daily requirement of 1 ounce meat meal for the grades K through 8, again, gives you some flexibility as the menu planner, as long as you meet your 9 ounce weekly requirement. So what I kind of always recommend is, if you're going to plan a hamburger, if you plan for a 2 ounce whole grain bun and a 2 ounce hamburger patty, you're going to be in compliance for K through 12. So that's a kind of a quick review on meal pattern. And if you have any questions, we can discuss those at the end. So now I want to switch topics to production records. So production records, of course, are required to be completed daily. They demonstrate compliance with meal pattern and that you're entitled to be reimbursed for the meals that you served. So without complete production records, we would not be able to reimburse you for those meals. So it's very important to make sure the records are complete and that they show all the food components that you prepared and served. Also, they're a way for you to track your food production. How much was served to the students, sold a la carte, how much was left over. Great to use for forecasting, or when I prepare these items again next time, I'll know if I need to make more or less. The production records are completed by each preparation kitchen. So for those of you who are in satellite sites or vended sites, as Donna was talking about, the kitchen that prepares the food would be completing the production record, and then we'll talk about delivery tickets for satellite sites. So on the next slide, there are production record forms for both the school lunch program and the summer feeding program. Even though schools are following the summer food service meal pattern requirements, you can still use the lunch production records, since this is the record most schools are accustomed to using. Both forms collect all the meal pattern information, but if you are following the school lunch meal pattern, then you should be using the correct production record for that. So the school lunch production record for breakfast, for school lunch, there is a production record, 1 for breakfast, 1 for lunch. Then there's also an optional multi-day form, which can be used to track things that you set out on a regular basis, such as condiments, or if you have a fruit vegetable bar. And then there's delivery tickets that we're going to talk about. And in the summer food service program, there's actually only 1 production record. And then at the top, you circle whether or not it's for breakfast, lunch, or there's snack in there too. but you have to complete a form for each meal. So one for breakfast and one for lunch. We highly recommend, to help keep you organized, I have this nice little picture of these notebooks here, is to organize yourself with 3-ring notebooks. You could have a production record binder, one for breakfast and one for lunch, because as the school year goes on, they're going to get full. And the other thing you might consider is Donna's going to talk about recipes and Marianne's going to talk about labels. That's another good way, is to put those items in 3-ring notebooks for quick reference. Keep you organized. So on the next slide, let's talk about that production record. So what are the required items you will need to complete production records? Well, the top part of the record is what you're planning on serving, how many meals you plan to prepare, and this is information that can be recorded on the top part of the production record in advance, because it's all about what I'm planning to do. And then the lower half of the record is where you record the food items that you used and information about those food items, whether it was prepared by a school recipe or if you purchased it. And if you purchased an item, we want to record the product brand and the product number. These are great references for you. You know, if there was a food recall, you would want to know what the product number of that item is. And the other reason why you want to put the brand and the product number is, if you really like the item, you want to remember what it was. And if you don't like the item, you really want to remember what it was. And the other thing is, it links it back to the labels that Marianne's going to talk about, or to the recipe that you used. You will document also the total amount of food that was prepared. This can be recorded by number of servings or the number of batches per recipe, or by pounds. And if your program sells seconds or a la carte items, you'll also record that at the bottom, and also unused portions or leftovers. Since the bottom part of the record is about actual amounts, we also want you to record the actual counts of students that you served and adults. You know, at the top part of the production record, we're recording what we're planning. This is how many we plan to have come. But then on the bottom part of the production record is where your actual counts are. And you may need to get that information from someone in the office after the meal has been served at the end of the day or the next morning. On the next slide, we'd like to show an example of some time-saving ideas. So instead of writing the same information every day, we can create a master production record. So this is an example of the top portion of the school lunch production record. This is where you can record the information that will be the same every day. So the highlighted areas in the blue are completed, since these are things that are served every day. Then you go to the copy machine and make your master copies so that you don't have to write these things every day. So just think about different ways to save time. We don't want production records. We want production records to be completed by the end of the day. You know, as I talked about, we can record the top portion after we have the menu planned, and then the bottom portion, hopefully we can record most of the information about the products. And then all I have to record at the end of the meal is what was left over or how much I sold. Now, this was a very quick overview of production records, because I do want you to, there was some training available for you to watch. The next slide, we want to talk about the delivery ticket that I mentioned. So for satellite sites. So schools that receive their meals from a central kitchen should receive a delivery ticket along with the food each day. This delivery ticket serves as a way to document meal pattern requirements and serving sizes. So what this does is it helps the person that's, when the food comes into the kitchen, they know how much they're supposed to serve each student. You know, here's the planned portion sizes for the day. It also serves as a document for time and temperature control for the items that are potentially hazardous. So on the left-hand side, the ticket records the number of meals sent, the menu, the portion sizes to be served. And then staff on site must record the temperature of any food items that require time temperature control. And this is done when the cameras are opened at serving time, and then the temp can be recorded on the delivery ticket. Some schools also use a log sheet to record their temperatures, but that's optional. But why not record it on a piece of paper you already have, write it on your hands. And on the right-hand side of the delivery ticket, this is a place for you to document other things that happen. So if the staff has condiments available that they're using to serve along with the meal, they can be documented here. Or if you have any other extra food items that you get out from the refrigerator or from the cupboard, you'd record them here. There's also a place for the milk recipe. Now the milk recipe can be written on at the beginning of the school year, and then it will remain the same unless the milk choices change, or sometimes the milk recipe is documented on a separate piece of paper and put in the front of the notebook. Either way works. And on the next slide, have a picture of showing, I love this picture. I got this from another school. So getting production records completed, it's a team effort, right? So here what we have is all the different production records are on clipboards with pens attached. How easy is that? And they even color coded them. There's a color code for breakfast and lunch production records. There's a multi-day form there, and they even have the temperature log for refrigerator units there on a clipboard. They're all together, and then a copy of the menu for the week. So kind of a command central for recording what's going on in the kitchen there, and what a great way to do it in a team effort. So that's my quick review on production records, because there actually was, in the online training that I think most of you viewed or are going to view, under other topics, there is a session in there on production records, and I go into more detail on how to complete them for school lunch. And then also there are the links for the forms and examples for you to view. So Mary Ann, the next slide, we're going to talk about labels.
Thanks, Michelle. So let's talk about the kinds of labels that you need to have on file. First of all, you do not need to keep labels on everything. It's primarily your meat alternates and grain items. We do not need to see labels on produce. And it's really not necessary to keep labels on all of your canned or frozen fruits and vegetables. However, there are some exceptions to that. We would expect to see label information on any of your frozen potato products, such as French fries or tater tots, because if you were to look at a database, there are literally hundreds of French fries to choose from. So again, we would need to see specific information on those items being served at your school. Other examples would include if you use any box potatoes, such as a gratin or scallop potatoes, or instant potato flakes. You should have documentation on file for those particular items. The only canned item that I can think of that would require a label to be on file would be like a canned baked bean, because there can definitely be quite a bit of difference in nutritional content from one company to another when we talk about a product like that. Next slide. Well, to begin with, we need to see some basic information, such as an ingredient statement, as well as the nutrition fact labels. And then in addition to these two pieces of information, you're also going to need additional information, such as a child nutrition label or a product formulation statement to demonstrate meal pattern compliance if it happens to be a combination food. And a combination food is going to be one which is defined as being made up of more than one meal component. So we would expect to see additional label information on any of your breaded meat items, a breaded fish portion, calzones, burritos, pizza, because all of those are examples of items that are made up of multiple components. You know, they contain meat alternate, they contain grain, and they may also contain some vegetable as well. Next slide. All right, so here we have an example of a child nutrition label, and these labels are actually included in your handout as well. Again, a child nutrition label is going to tell us how each component contributes to the meal pattern. So here we have an example of a chicken stir-fry bowl, and it tells us that it weighs 4.5 ounces. But of that 4.5 ounces, what we need to know is how much meat credit, how much grain credit, and how much vegetable credit do we get? And without a child nutrition label, we're not going to have that information available to us. And so this particular example then tells us, you know, that this 4.5 ounce chicken stir-fry bowl, it provides 1.5 ounces of meat, an ounce of grain, and a 1/4 cup of dark green vegetable, as well as a 1/4 cup of red orange vegetable, and 1/8 cup of other vegetable for the child nutrition programs. You know, the child nutrition labels or product specification sheets, this is going to be the documentation that's going to demonstrate that you have met meal pattern requirements. One thing that I do want to add, and Michelle made reference to it a little bit earlier, is please keep in mind that, you know, just because an item has a CN label doesn't necessarily mean that it meets meal pattern requirements. And Michelle just gave that example of the Smucker's Uncrustable, you know, the 2.2 ounce peanut butter sandwich. You know, it provides an ounce of meat and a serving of bread. But again, if you are participating in the summer food service program, that daily meat alternate requirement is 2 ounces. So if you were offering one sandwich, you know, you would be 1 ounce short in terms of offering meat alternate. And as Michelle maybe actually had said, oftentimes we simply see a cheese stick combined with the sandwich to meet the meat alternate requirement. Next slide. If a child nutrition label is not available, then you need to look for a product specification sheet, or as I have said earlier, we refer to them as product formulation statements. When you're taking a look at one of these handouts, it's typically going to be a full page. It is going to list all of the creditable ingredients that are included in that product. The math will be shown. And then towards the bottom, what you're going to actually see then is the meal pattern contribution. And typically at the very bottom, then you are going to see that it is going to either have the printed name or the signature of a company executive certifying that the information, you know, contained on this page is true and correct. So this happens to be an example of pancakes, and what our product specification sheet tells us is that 2 pancakes provides 2 servings of grain. And again, there's your documentation. So then I think the next question becomes, you know, where do we find this label information? So let's go to the next slide. All right, I included this example because if you're lucky enough, you're going to have some labels where everything is, you know, contained in one location, you know, nice and neat. This appears right on the box. And so with this particular example of breaded chicken tenders, as you can see, we've got the ingredient statement listed. Over to the right-hand side, we've got our nutrition facts label. Then back over on the left-hand side, we've got our child nutrition label. And again, what it tells us is, you know, it gives us the portion size, and it tells us that 3 chicken tenders is going to provide 2 ounces of meat and 1 serving of grain. And so there's everything you need right there. However, that's not how all label information appears on the box. And so sometimes maybe you'll have an ingredient statement and the nutrition facts, which you can take off the box. But as I said, if it's a combination item, you're going to have to go in search of, a product specification sheet. You're still going to need to find that additional information. And so our recommendation is that you search for this information by manufacturer, and then you enter the product number. And hopefully you will be able to locate the label information that you need to see at that particular time. If you don't have any luck doing that, you certainly can contact your distributor to see if they can help in any way. The bottom line is, you need to have this documentation on file to be able to demonstrate meal pattern compliance, or you're going to need to look, for another similar item that comes with that label information. For example, there's a lot of breaded chicken patties out there. Some of them have a child nutrition label and some of them do not. So you definitely want to go in search of that CN label. And again, it's what you're looking for. I would say the majority of schools are going to be searching for a label that provides at least 2 ounces of meat and 1 serving of bread. And then finally, to wrap this up, the question becomes, where do we keep these labels? And as Michelle alluded earlier, we encourage you to keep them in a notebook. We ask that you separate them by component group so that you can easily locate them. So typically, what I've seen in a school is labels will be divided based on meat alternates, grain items. There'll be a section for fruits and vegetables. Some schools actually choose to save label information on their condiments, which is perfectly fine if they choose to do that. And the other thing that I see is oftentimes schools will have a separate section just for their breakfast items, so that they can easily locate those as well. And I think, as I had said earlier, in your packet, I included examples of those labels that we have talked about. So I think that's everything that I need to say. So I think Donna now is going to talk about recipes.
You betcha. Thank you, Marianne. Marianne just gave you a lot of good information about labels. So you know now how foods you purchase can contribute to meal pattern. But what if you have some recipes you want to use, or maybe you want to do some more scratch cooking? Scratch cooking is becoming a bigger topic in school meals. So we're going to now talk about recipes. Maybe some of you inherited a box of recipes that look like some your grandmother wrote. We have seen that before in schools. Maybe some of you didn't inherit any recipes at all. Maybe, though, you are one of the lucky ones and you have a notebook full of standardized recipes neatly organized by category. So let's talk first of all about what a standardized recipe is. It's a recipe that has been carefully adapted and tested to ensure it will produce a consistent product every time. Why is it important to use standardized recipes in school food service? Well, just for the reason I just mentioned, consistency, producing a consistent quality product every time, no matter who prepares it. Let's say that Esther is the person who makes the chili in the kitchen every day. Every time you have chili, she makes it. She follows the recipe exactly as it is stated, and the kids absolutely love it. Well, Esther runs off to the Bahamas, and now Grace has to make the chili. And Grace is known for, throwing in a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Maybe she puts in a little bit more chili powder, oregano, cumin. Maybe she adds some hot sauce, and the kids are just turning up their nose at this chili. Well, Grace needs to learn how to follow that standardized recipe to produce the same quality product every single time that the kids come to rely on. It's also important to use them because they produce a predictable yield, which results in an accurate determination of how a certain portion size contributes to meal pattern. And it also helps to prevent food waste, because if you know exactly how much your chili recipe is going to make and you know how much you need for that day, you can make that amount and it will even out as closely as possible. So that also helps with food cost control, and it also helps boost employee confidence. If Grace can learn to make that chili recipe the way it's stated, the positive feedback from the students is a real employee confidence booster, and that's helpful too. So Allie, if you don't mind, please, if you would go to the handout and let's look at a couple of handouts based on recipe information. We're getting there. And while she's scrolling down, we'll go ahead. There you go. Thank you. The top part of this handout actually is on our website. The top part of the handout is the information standardized recipes must include. And as you see on the top of the recipe in the middle of the page, a lot of it is standard information, recipe name. It does give the amounts of ingredients for either 50 or 100 servings. This is a USDA recipe, as the source portion says. And then there's a list of ingredients listed in the order used, and then the directions for the recipe that include critical control points, which are temperature points and other points that are really important in this recipe based on food safety. So basically, that's the basic information for the recipe. If we scroll down a little bit further, and we'll see some more information, and this is what's really important when we talk about meal contribution. Number 5 is the serving size. It tells you what the serving size should be for elementary. You could change that to K through 8 or 6 through 8, K through 5. Serving size for secondary, it gives the amounts. And then number 7 next to it also shows the serving utensils to be used. So that means that people don't have to think about what they're going to use to serve the proper portion size. Number 6 gives the total yield, which again is good for your planning and your menu planning. And then number 8 is all about meal pattern contribution. And it shows for the elementary, a 1/2 cup portion provides 2 ounce meat alternate, and 3/8 cup fruit or vegetable. So that is really important information. You don't have to go looking for it every time you make the chili. You don't have to calculate anything. It's right there on the handout for you. So the next handout shows a recipe from the Department of Education in Kansas. And this is one of the websites we have linked to our recipe webpage, and our recipe webpage has a link on the resources document. That's the very first page of this PDF packet. And basically you'll see this is just a different way, a little bit of a different organization of the recipe, but it gives us the same information. The ingredients, the servings, this one only has 100 servings listed, but you could actually calculate the amounts needed for 50 or 75, whatever is good for your operation. And then it also below that gives a serving size. Again, this is K through 8 on this one, and 9 through 12, and the meal pattern contribution, what each serving provides, the yield. This one also provides nutrition information. This is not mandatory on a standardized recipe, but it's definitely a plus if you have that information also. So this type of recipe form on our recipe webpage, you can find blank standardized recipe forms. You can type in them. It makes it much easier to record your own recipes. And then there are many websites linked there. We have the Kansas website. I believe we have the Iowa website, the USDA recipes, and there are a ton of standardized USDA recipes out there. So this is a really good site to go to. And if you are, planning, once again, as Michelle showed you, to use a lot of recipes, we definitely encourage then you can put these in a notebook and organize them by category, and you're good to go. And when review time comes around, we will smile at you with a glow on our faces. We will be so happy. So now I'm going to give this back to Michelle, who will talk to us a bit about procurement.
Well, thank you, Donna, for all that information about recipes. And I'm just thinking I want to follow Esther to the Bahamas. So, what is procurement? So procurement is something that you are actually familiar with because you procure things all the time. So what do I mean by that? Well, procuring is when you buy groceries, or it takes place when you're purchasing a household appliance. It also happens when you're contracting for a house or car repair. So even though the term may be unfamiliar to you, many of the concepts of procurement will seem very familiar. That's because procurement is buying stuff. But actually, it's more than buying stuff. It's a multi-step process for obtaining goods, products, and services at the best price. One of the easiest ways that I can think of to describe procurement is to describe the process. Let's go through the steps of procurement and then try to put each step into common terms that you're familiar with. So planning. Planning is basically making your grocery list. What do I need? How much do I need? Am I buying for a week or a month? So this is forecasting and planning. And then drafting specification. Well, that's deciding what kind or type of items do you want? Do I want fresh apples? Or do I want applesauce? Then you compare who has the best price that meets your specification. And when the product arrives, did you actually get what you ordered? So now on the next slide, let's look at the different procurement methods. So selecting the proper procurement method is based on how much money you're going to spend. This is the federal regulations. This is where the federal regulations really take effect and are very prescriptive on how much money you are going to spend and what rules you have to follow for procurement. So it's important to know if your school has a local small purchase threshold. So you may want to check with your superintendent or your business manager. If the school does not, then you follow the state federal threshold, which is $250,000. So if we follow the flow chart, all the purchases under this amount can be done following the informal purchasing methods of either micro purchases or small purchases. Micro purchases do not require you compare prices, but the prices need to be reasonable and you must distribute purchases equitably among suppliers. So for example, you buy apples from more than one vendor. For a small purchase, you make your decisions based on comparing prices. A simple explanation here is you compare grocery ads or vendor prices each week or monthly, however you decide, and then you buy where you get the most for your money. And formal purchases are not required unless you're going to spend $250,000 or more. So this method is not used very often by schools, but it can be used if you want at any time. The next slide is about the Buy American provision. So all food procurement transactions using funds from the nonprofit school food service account must comply with the Buy American provision. So all school food authorities must purchase domestic agricultural commodities and food products. For foods that are unprocessed, like strawberries, the agricultural commodities must be domestic, grown in the USA. And for foods that are processed, they must be processed domestically, canned in the USA, using domestic agricultural food components that are comprised of over 51% domestically grown items by weight or volume. So how can a school buy American food? Well, you can develop your menus that include only domestic foods. And you should include the Buy American provision in your written procurement procedures. Should be in your procurement plan. And you can require suppliers to attest that in their final food products, they are either 100% domestic or they meet the USDA criteria by weight or volume. And the other way is to buy USDA commodity foods. There are some exceptions to the Buy American provision. If the food item is not produced or manufactured in the United States in sufficient or reasonable quantities, that's an exception. So bananas could be that example. Comparing prices reveals that the cost of the US product is significantly higher than the non-domestic product. But if you use these exceptions, then remember that you need to keep records and documentation. And then the next slide. This is a handout that the School Nutrition Association, which the School Nutrition Association is a professional organization for school food service managers in all 50 states. And then each state has their own chapter. So the resources that they have on their website are excellent. If you're not a member of the School Nutrition Association, I'd recommend you look into it. And as a member, you can download stuff from their website, and you also get a great magazine that has articles about school food service programs. But you can also view those things not being a member. So the goal of this handout is to help anyone that's involved in purchasing goods and services for their food service program to gain a better overall understanding of the purchasing requirements for school districts. It's easy to read, and it could be something you could share with your business manager too. In most school districts, procurements are a shared activity between the school business manager and the food service manager. The procurement rules are the same for all child nutrition programs. So whether you're participating in the summer program or the school lunch program, the guidelines are the same. The underlying principle for all school meal procurements is that they must be fair, open, and competitive. Additionally, the procurement should be transparent. So on the next slide, what records do I need to show compliance? Well, all schools are required to have a procurement plan. So I would encourage you to review this plan. We provided a template for schools to customize and make their own. So there should be a copy at your school. The plan should outline all the steps your district takes in buying for the school meals program. This includes the methods of procurement that you use, how you solicit, how you award, and other relevant factors. So remember, I said it was a template. So if you read through the template and you say, this isn't quite what we do, you have the right to modify that and make that your own. The other thing that's included in the template procurement plan is a written code of ethics or conduct. And this is required that all school districts have this. Some already have their own. This establishes policies for the behavior of everyone involved in purchasing process. It helps avoid conflicts of interest and protect you against the appearance of such conflicts. For example, does your district allow you to accept a gift from a vendor? And if they do, is it a certain dollar value? So maybe you're allowed to accept a gift less than $50 or less than $100. That would be spelled out. The business manager of the school typically is responsible for keeping the records. So they would have store receipts and invoices and anything that's used to pay the bills. And most schools also have a business record keeping software. So then as the bills are being paid, they get coded into the software so that these things are being coded directly to the school food service account. And then from that software, we can obtain a list of the vendors that you do business with when we want to review your program. And I don't see too many schools that don't have software anymore. Otherwise, you're going to have the books, the old-fashioned books where you write everything down. So on the next slide, where can I find additional training on procurement? Well, here's a little clip of the other training session that we did. It was called Other Important Topics, and you can see the laundry list of topics that were included there. And there is a session in there on procurement. And on the next slide, another place to get resources, or a good, easy to read book that USDA created, is this document. And again, this is on your resource handouts. You'll find these links are all embedded in your handout for you. This is Procuring Local Foods for Child Nutrition Program. This explains micro purchasing, small purchasing, formal purchasing, and it's very easy to read. And even though it was written for procuring local foods, it explains the procurement process and micro purchasing very well. So I'd recommend it for additional reading sources if you want to learn more about procurement. And the next slide is a copy of our directory. So this is in your handouts. So the staff directory, this is updated because we've had some changes in staff, and we all have new phone numbers. So if you see one of these hanging on your bulletin board in your school, you're going to want to print and hang up the new one. So all the program specialist names are here. Our emails are here, so you can feel free to email anybody with questions. Sometimes that's a easy way to get a hold of us since you're busy in the kitchen cooking. And the other thing that's on here is the contacts for the commodity office. So Chad Moore is the director of U.S. Commodities. So if you have questions about commodities or how to order or anything with your order, that's who you'd contact. Or Brian Gerkensmeyer also will help you. So there's their emails and telephone numbers. And then what if you have questions about food safety concerns? If a refrigerator goes out or something. Mandy Carney is our contact at the Department of Health and Human Service. She is a health inspector, and there's her telephone number. And then there's a little bit of information on the bottom of this about SNA, which I already talked about. And we also do some other summer training. So a great handout for you to have. And then the last slide is a picture of your continuing education certificate that Donna mentioned. You've earned professional hours for today. So in your handout packet, there is a copy of the certificate. And so you're going to keep that in your records for your professional standards. So this was kind of a quick overview of some topics that we felt were important. We couldn't cover, you can't cover all the regulations in an hour. So we hope that you have taken the time to view the videos. And we wanted to allow plenty of time for you to ask questions. So I hope you feel comfortable unmuting and asking questions, or I see there's one in the chat box we'll answer. And I always say there's no such thing as a dumb question. We're all still learning all the time. So please feel free to ask us any questions about any topics, even if it's a topic we have not discussed so far today.
So Michelle, do we want to start? There's 2 questions in the chat box. I'll read them out loud. We'll start with that. We'll get everybody warmed up a little bit. There's a question on the production record. There's a column on the production record that indicates if the recipe is an SR, which is school recipe, a product number, or a commodity. And they're asking what if the product is a donation, like locally sourced ground beef, or if it's from the school greenhouse, like a farm-to-table lettuce.
So I can answer, and then if any of my coworkers want to add anything to anything that I say. So with fresh ground beef, for example, then really what I would be putting on there is how many pounds I used and what % of fat ratio it was. So if it was 80-20. And for fresh produce, it's fine to say that it's fresh. We don't have to have a product name on there or not. So then again, I would just record how many pounds of lettuce I used. Anybody have anything else to add to that? That's what I would do.
Great. Okay, there's one more question in the chat box. This school is asking, they send food to another school and fill out a delivery ticket, but do we need to record that information on a master production record also?
So this would be the central kitchen that's preparing the food, if I understand right, Nikki, and then you provide meals to another school. So on the production record in your kitchen, that is you're going to record all the food that is prepared in that central kitchen. And then the delivery ticket documents what goes out to that other site. So yes, everything would be recorded on that central production record.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That is all that we have in the chat box that I see. So if anyone has another question that they would just like to unmute and ask the group, please do so.
I have a question about the whole grain requirement.
Okay.
So I'm having a problem finding some items that we used to order in the past that were whole grain, CN labeled. And my salesman said that a lot of the companies are going away from that because the whole grain requirements have been cut back. So he was saying that a lot of schools are just purchasing items without the CN label. So how do you go about that? If you can no longer find the whole grain, no longer find the CN, how do you credit that for, say, if it's a combination item with protein in it? Like an example would be like breaded mozzarella cheese sticks.
So on the breaded mozzarella cheese stick, one of the other ways, it's not going to have a CN label to tell you how much it credits then is what you're saying. Or does it say that it even credits as one grain serving?
Well, we used to be able to get one in that did have the CN label, and it had what it credited for the meat alternative and the grain, but they no longer carry that. And the salesman said, well, schools are no longer getting this in the whole grain because the company no longer makes it that way. So.
Well, my question was, does it even say that it credits as a grain then? So if it doesn't have a CN label on it, then we don't know how it credits. So then Marianne had talked about a product specification sheet. We'd have to have that.
Okay.
That was a product that we'd want. And we don't have to have all of our items be whole grain rich. I can understand that the salesman, that's what he was meaning when he said that. Because over the course of the week, all the grains that you offer over the week, 50% of them have to be whole grain rich. So that gives you some flexibility to offer some products that are not whole grain rich, but we still have to know if it credits as a grain serving. So I would look for a different product, or then the mozzarella stick, does it even tell you it credits as a meat?
Right. That's my question. If it no longer has a CN label.
So we don't know how much meat, we don't know how much grain. So I wouldn't want to plan on that to meet meal pattern because I don't have proper documentation. Okay. It would be an extra, but then you have to add it into your calories. So I would look for a product that has a CN label. I think there's still some out there. Sometimes just because one salesperson says something, maybe you go to another company or look somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add to that, Marianne?
Well, the only thing that I was going to add is the fact that if Michelle is correct in the sense that, it's combination items. So again, we need to know, how it contributes to the meal pattern. And if you are able to get a product specification sheet and it makes reference to the amount of, and I'm just giving this as an example, if it makes reference to the fact and it indicates that this breaded cheese stick provides, 1 ounce of meat alternate to the meal pattern, then that means that you are not getting any grain credit with that particular product. That's a possibility.
Yeah. Good question, Cindy. Any other questions out there on topics we haven't talked about yet, or questions about meal pattern, production records, training? Want some one-on-one help?
I have a quick question. We have some elementary kids that would like to drink water. Is that a rule from the state that they have to have milk? That they have to have like a letter from their doctor or parent to have water, or is that a rule from you guys, or is that a?
So regarding milk, of course, we have to provide it to the students. It's a component. And we also have water requirements because at the breakfast meal service and at lunch meal service, we need to make water available to the students.
Okay.
And with offer versus serve, you know, you are implementing offer versus serve at your school, meaning the students may make choices. For lunch, they have to have 3 of the 5 components. And so they can decline the milk and take water as long as their tray still is reimbursable and it has 3 full components on it for lunch.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. You know, the water idea though is that it would be available to them in addition to the milk. So they could get a cup of water and a carton of milk to have with their meal. But if they're not milk drinkers, they don't have to take the milk.
Okay. All righty. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't talk about offer versus serve. I think that's been covered under the Serving Up Great School Meals. And there's another Serving Up Great School Meals coming up on, is it January 20th, Allie?
Yep. Next Wednesday.
1 week from today.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anything else we can help with, or any ideas on what we can do to help you in your new position? And I do want you all feel comfortable to email any one of the program consultants or pick up the phone and give any of us a call anytime you have a question. That's what we're here for, and we're used to talking to schools all the time. So don't be shy about asking your questions. We love to help you up front. We want you to get started off correctly and know that you feel comfortable in what you're doing in your program. Because if you're following the summer food service meal pattern and your school hasn't had a review, you may be getting a desk audit this year. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable in what you're doing. And that's another thing we've typically done for schools is if you would like someone to look at your production records and see how you're doing, we'd be glad to do that. We'll help you make suggestions for any additions that you need to do. We won't take away any money for looking at records for somebody that's new, but we'd be glad to look at your records for you and see if we can tell you if they look good or if you need to add some more information to them. Well, we're about at that time. If we don't have any more questions, we want to thank you for joining us today. Hope that you find the resources helpful, and feel free to reach out to any of the consultants if you need to.
Thanks for hopping